Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to the July edition of the Industry IoT Virtual Workshop. This afternoon, we are lucky enough to have Christine Ashton on board to host the session today. Christine is the CDO for ERP Cloud over at SAP. Welcome, Christine.
Hi Dan, how are you?
Good, thank you. So initially, Christine has a presentation for us by PowerPoint. The session will be interactive, so there'll be opportunity to ask questions. At the bottom of your screens, there is a Q&A chat box where you can post questions. I will help facilitate the questions and prompt Christine when you guys have asked them. If you have any questions on the way, then please let me know. But if we can, perhaps get the presentation done initially, and then we can do some Q&A at the end. But we'll see how it goes along the way. But Christine, over to you.
All right. Well, thanks, Dan. And how long have we got for the presentation, do you think?
So we've got 60 minutes in total. So it's completely up to you. I'd say typically we try and do half and half. So maybe 30 minutes in the presentation, 40 minutes, and then the rest for Q&A.
All right, well, thanks. I'll try not to ramble on too much then. Hi. Well, hello, everybody. And it's great to be here, part of your very interesting series of webinars and conferences. And what I would like to talk about today is why going beyond incremental is so important for companies. And I've entitled the presentation, as you can probably see, Beyond Incremental, with quite a flashy picture there. And it's really about why is going beyond the incremental really the trick to nonlinear growth, and why now, why is this idea of going beyond incremental in terms of innovation, how you run your business, how you service your customers, how you think about your talent, why is that so important now, probably more than ever? And for anyone that reads some of the business journals, you'll know that businesses are quickly going out of business these days and don't stay on the Standard & Poor list or any of these other lists as long as they did, just because things are moving very quickly. If people are not, if businesses are not agile or agile enough, then they're being disrupted. Their markets are being disrupted, and consequently, nobody's got the right to stay at the #1 post in their chosen industry for as length of time as companies have done. So I picked up, put together some topic points for this afternoon. Let me just move that out the way. So let's start to think about, against the backdrop of trying to be more going beyond incremental and being perhaps a bit more challenging and disruptive in terms of some of the things we're doing in our business. What does digital transformation mean in that context? And also, what do we need to do to be able to identify where to start? And the other thing I just wanted to talk to you about was, what are the traits of the companies that have already started, and what is it that they're doing well that perhaps some of you on this call can take away and think about how you apply in some of your companies, if it's appropriate, or maybe it's just a few ideas that might get you to a place that's right for your company. And just let's start to touch on what are the things that we need to start doing and thinking about that helps us to take advantage of some of the new technologies, be that cloud, machine learning, artificial intelligence, or all of these new technologies that are coming out that actually could help us to automate and streamline our businesses better, that again would help us to challenge some of the people in our industries, and particularly our competitors, the way we've just described. So one of the things I thought it was useful to just reflect on was what I call ubiquitous. And it's not that long ago since we thought of ubiquity in terms of the fact that you could go to Starbucks and the Wi-Fi was ubiquitous and it was free, and you could get on and do all the things you wanted to do. But What I think is really interesting about ubiquity, and I think it sort of helps us to understand how fast things are moving, is how much we have moved our mindset forward in terms of what ubiquity stands for us. So, like I say, you know, at one time we were content just to have ubiquitous Wi-Fi. Now we want everything connected. We want to be able to pay for things easily and ubiquitously. We want to be in contact with devices. We want people to be in contact with us via wearables. And I think it's quite amazing to think about the market for wearables, for example. You know, that's growing into an industry that is now worth billions and billions, when actually it was easy to perhaps think not that long ago that it was just maybe trivial. I think what has really changed in terms of ubiquity is this fact that we expect to be connected absolutely wherever we are these days, whether we're in a plane, a train, absolutely everywhere. And another thing that I think is really, really interesting is if you were a consultancy company, for example, a few years ago, you would think that you had the best people and, you know, your customers came to you for knowledge to do things, be that their taxes or how to change their businesses. Actually, now, if you ask yourself, if you want to do something new or find out about something, you know, where do you go? And where you go is, if you're like me, whether you're tiling the bathroom or thinking about a new skill, you go to YouTube. And actually, if you look at YouTube these days, the access YouTube gives you to experts all over the world is quite incredible. And what's also quite interesting and, you know, becoming more ubiquitous is resources. So, for example, if I wanted to put out a solver question out via one of the internet platforms, be it in innovative.com or innocentive.com, or some of these others, I could get access very cheaply to probably some of the best lawyers that are perhaps operating from their home from any part of the world. So I think what's interesting about this is this whole ubiquitous of, be it connectivity, commerce, being able to pay for things, access to what's going on around us, or services having access to us, or, you know, resources. It is just moving at one heck of a pace, much faster, I think, than we would actually first imagine. And I think so much so that, again, you know, if I'm a consultancy company, then the underlying technology is moving so fast that actually what people are predicting, and this was a prediction from Oxford Martin School about role automation in the service industries by 2035. So, for example, if I'm one of the big fives, you know, what they're saying is 94% of the things that accountants and auditors do could be automated by 2035. And it probably won't be 2035, it probably will be sooner than that, because we all know our ability to forecast some of these things is often a bit off. So then you say to yourself, oh, that's quite interesting, that's quite disruptive for my business. You know, what do I do with all these people that potentially are going to be, their skills are going to be automated? How do I start to add value in this world that's being disrupted? And, you know, I was talking to, for example, a partner from one of the big consultancies, and then they were saying that, you know, they're really racing to keep ahead and to really look at how they add value. And it doesn't really just stay in like accountancy and auditing. I mean, you've got to think of other roles, and on this slide there's just a few examples of like service technicians and computer programmers, but I think we can all think of a lot more different types of roles that potentially are going to be automated. And it's not that the roles are going to be automated, it's important, it's actually that the way that companies currently get their revenues and their profits is going to be totally disrupted, and probably at a speed that's a lot faster than we might anticipate. And, you know, I've got a slide here about impacts of disruption, but I think one of the things to think about is the way customer expectation is changing. And, you know, people are very much in the role of they want things customized for them. They want things to their specifications. And, you know, they want to have things and services delivered to them according to their individual needs. And I call that the lot of one. And if you think about it, if you're an industry that's manufacturing lots of goods that are all the same, you know, the chances are you are going to be disrupted by somebody that can manufacture those goods either to order or to my very individual specification. I was talking to a CEO of a big company. It was a thread and fabric making company. And they said that, you know, people don't want to buy ordinary threads and fabrics anymore. What they want to buy are shoes and clothes that are embroidered or designed with their specification. And, you know, that particular company was investing an awful lot in 3D printing, and so that they could actually aspire to this idea of the lot of one. And I think it's really, really interesting. I also think that this march of new business models is going to be key, because it's not going to be good enough to just transact anymore and just sell things. People are wanting so much more. They're wanting information about the things they're buying. They want to know how to use it, where they're using it. And often people don't want to buy things anymore. They just want the service. And somebody that, for example, that can forecast when a customer is going to need a service, be that ploughing a field or traveling to a location, or all sorts of things that you can possibly imagine, and define it in terms of outcomes that they can deliver via service and do it without owning anything, is kind of going to be streets ahead, really. And then, you know, the third thing is something we mentioned earlier, which is the technology landscape is changing. Not only have you got new entrants, new ways of charging for things, new ways of metering things, but you've just also got new technologies themselves. And I think, you know, we've certainly not even begun to scratch the surface when it comes to things like blockchain and all the things that can be used for. And the fact that things are just, excuse me, moving terribly fast. So, you know, something to consider, you know, in all of our businesses is what all of these changing markets are doing is causing what we often lovingly refer to as the C-suite to perhaps think differently about business and to think differently about the things they need to compete and, you know, how they need them. So, you know, it's not good enough for the HR people to just be placing adverts anymore. You know, they need the right people onboarded at the right time with the right skills. And that might be that, like some of the consultancies I was mentioning, is you actually become much more reliant on contingent workers going forward. I think the other thing that's changing is CFOs are not really interested in static finance anymore. You know, they really want real-time finance. They want it as it happens. They want to know the money that came in today, and they want to understand that so that they can make the most of their capital. The funds, be it capital or OPEX. And, you know, be compliant at the same time. So doing their accounts as they go rather than spending lots of time doing that sort of thing. So your CFO actually becomes your chief forecasting officer, the man or woman that can tell you, actually, it's the right time to go and buy this business or carve this business out. Oh, and by the way, we can afford to do it because we can see the money in real time. So, you know, start to think about it. You know, we've run businesses very siloed in the past. So this idea now of starting to connect finance in real time with resources in real time, understand the margins on projects, and then I wouldn't say execute your strategy in real time, but be able to execute your strategy in a much more agile way. And of course, correct your strategy in a way that's agile. And those are kind of the skills and the management practices that I think are really going to take us into this next decade, you know, from 2020 onwards, which I think will very much be the decade of the connected enterprise and the agile enterprise, and, you know, the the way that companies will connect better together to create communities and ecosystems. That's the word I was desperately searching for. Ecosystems, you know. So one of the things I said I'd talk about was, what does it take to be successful in this world that can sound quite chaotic? And what does it take for companies to have what I think we lovingly refer to, certainly at SAP, as the digital mindset? So let's look at the 4 things that you need. You know, one of the things that I would point out is the businesses that are succeeding are the ones that are truly committed to transformation. It's led from the top down. It's serious. They're really making sure that they can reallocate resources onto it, and you know, there's very definitive outcome-based goals. The other things that they're busily doing is that they're transforming from the customer first, or the customer back, as I always used to call it, and that's where their focus is. And you can perhaps understand that if we look around the web these days, if I've got a company called Ashton.com and I'm selling things, then the bar has been raised by your Amazons of this world, and whether I'm small or big, people are going to naturally compare me with, can I do returns like Amazon can? Am I online 24/7? So there's a whole expectation about that. So you could argue, if you can start to get your business attuned to how the customer wants to buy from you and think about how they interact with you, then actually that urgency and agility flows all the way back through your business processes. And then, you know, the companies that succeed are using what is lovingly referred to as the bimodal IT technology architecture. And I'll say a bit more about that, but the way to think about that is you think about technology as run the business and transform the business. And you think about them quite separate. Even if they're the same technology, you think about how you apply them quite separately. And I'll come back to that in a few moments. And then the last thing is, you know, these organizations are talent driven. You know, they're determined to get the best talent, and they're determined to make their companies places where talent would want to work. And, you know, the other thing I would say is that they're also trying to make their companies so that they operate in a way I've talked about, agile, and, you know, they're not just about continuous improvement, because they do understand, you know, the imminent threats to their very own survival. So like I said, you know, the leaders are focusing on transformation, and, you know, this is how the figures pan out. They set goals, and they're miles ahead of the people that are not succeeding. So 93% of the CEOs in businesses that are succeeding are saying that it is really critically important to retain competitive advantage compared to companies that are just perhaps just carrying on the way they have done previously. And the other thing that's really interesting is they see changing the business structure and changing the way people carry out their tasks, the way teams are structured, as just part of it. So you're probably starting to build up this idea that these businesses are very agile, very self-forming, they reform, and they go through this cycle very quickly. They don't just do it every decade or every 3 years. They're going through this reinvention all the time. And, you know, the stats here, everyone can read them. They speak for themselves, really. You know, they're more inclined to cite technology as really helping them to do what they're trying to do and to get where they're trying to get to. So talent was another of the criterias here, and I just wanted to spend a bit of time on talent, and you know how valuable the most effective companies see that. And here's a model for you, and it's quite an interesting model, because, you know, as I was talking earlier about the accountants and the auditors perhaps being automated, and I know none of us would perhaps shed a tear for the automation of auditors, but, what's interesting about it is it starts to highlight the job of leaders like ourselves in corporations over the next few years, and how we need to be thinking about how we create high value work for our talent. And if you look at this graph, up the left hand side you've got productivity, and along the bottom you've got the various eras, the 60s to the 80s, the 1990s to 2000s, 2000 to 2010, 2020. And then over the top you've got a description of that era. The 1960s, 1980s, you could argue that, it was after the Second World War. People had learned in the war how to do manufacturing, and then during the 60s, it was about how do we automate production lines, and how do we, really start to make things to feed the world and grow the world. And that was very much transactional. You learned what you did, very repetitive. And then it was, well, how can we do it better? And I think we all remember business re-engineering well, I hope, well, certainly I do anyway, let me speak for myself. And we all remember that, and trying to make things better and faster. And then, after the 2000s, you started to get digital transformation. But what's interesting is, as the new talent has started to come into the workforce, and you could argue that the new talent, millennials and all of those guys, are coming in just as we're trying to automate out the repetitive tasks. And, it's about these higher value roles that you actually start to have the people coming into the workforce to do, the more analytical jobs, the more forecasting jobs, the what if it jobs. And you could argue that if companies perhaps don't get the right level of automation and eradication of repetitive tasks, then they won't succeed in attracting new talent. And years ago, I know when I entered the workforce, I was probably glad of any job anybody offered me. But these days, youngsters know their value, and they know that they probably don't want to work for a company where perhaps there's a lot of manual work and things are just not giving them a vocation and espousing and helping them espouse their values. So it's certainly something to think about when we start to think about where do we start in terms of digital transformation. I mean, I'll just blast through some of these because you can probably get the sense of, what's going on in a very rapid amount of time, and, how leaders are starting to want to change over their talent and change the way things are done. And, in a recent survey, it turned out that CEOs were much more bothered about this and much more concerned about how resilient their companies were and how their firms could continue to recover from industry disruptions and industry changes. And I think you would agree that that means that, you do need, talent to do that. And in the companies where they are doing transformation, people are citing that people are more interested and more responsive. And so you could argue that, digital transformation pays off, and it makes it easier for companies to retain their talent. I think the other thing that, is a joy to know is that the leading companies also are attributing higher profit and higher margins to the fact that they're reorganizing their companies along the lines we've talked about, really thinking about how they standardize a lot of the non-core activities, how they really focus on being able to run the businesses in real time, and how they can really start to forecast what's going on rather than just make to order. And like I said earlier, the customer experience is the place that these companies that are doing well start first. And, they really think that it is empowering their companies, creating global brands, and, driving sales, which I think is what, companies are there to do. Now, if I say this is kind of the science slide, I think when we think about the customer and think about digitizing around the customer experience first, it's important to think, I think, that digital disruption is happening on 3 levels. And what I've got here is a slide that I quite like, I use quite a lot, because along the bottom, it's about what is your company's attitude to change, and how is your company thinking about that change. And up the left-hand side is what's going on in your market. So, for example, if your market is really changing very fast and your company's appetite to change is really high, then you're going to be in the top right-hand corner, launching new products, thinking about selling services, rather than perhaps if your industry is not changing very fast, or you don't perceive it to be changing fast, and your company's appetite to take up change is pretty low, then maybe you're down in the bottom left and you really are just renewing what you've got. You're not even doing any continuous improvement. So I think what's really important is to recognize that grid and recognize where you want to be on that grid, and also start to think about where you want to be on that grid, be that your current operations, your omni-channels, or your channels to market, and the way you describe and articulate your product, or how you automate your product, or digitize your product, or subscribe for your product, and start to really think hard about that. And also consider whether actually you want to be disrupting your company as a whole, or whether you could think of different divisions of your company and perhaps think about digital disruption. It's difficult to say that one. Digital disruption in a multi-tiered way, and perhaps think about a division that you've either bought or maybe you're about to spin off, and maybe you think about, well, actually, our appetite to transform that part of the business is much higher than anywhere else. We could actually look at how we can improve the products there and go to the top right-hand corner for that particular part of the business. Or maybe you've got another bit of the business and you think, well, actually, it would be really good to create what I call a pop-up business, a bit like, often they do in shopping centres. Suddenly you'll just have a little pop-up shop for a couple of days. So could you, if your appetite for change is perhaps a bit lower, think about actually going into the top left-hand corner and thinking about how you could apply new technology to maybe just an area of business you've never done business in. So I think it really is important to segment what you want to do and to really think through the benefits, rather than perhaps trying to either apply it blindly or to apply disruption, whether it's digital disruption, talent disruption, process disruption, in a blanket way. I hope this is making sense to everybody. Then I was going to say that, something again to think about is the way you can think about processes and technology. So on this diagram, you can see I've put a bar along the bottom. If you're along the left-hand side of it, what you really need to think about is process and technology to run your business really efficiently and fit the standard. Whereas in the middle, you're really looking at how you can differentiate. And then towards the right-hand side, you're really thinking about, well, what can I do in terms of people, process, technology to really reimagine my business? So here is a slide that just really shows what I've just been talking about. Up the left-hand side, you've got the amount of change in your industry. You've got your company's ability to execute change. And then you've got some examples of how you could start to not only test your ambition for change, but actually put together some projects to try it out perhaps on a small scale, or to think about how you might try it out in the form of automation, applying to new technologies, etc. And what I've done with this slide is just started to show what the benefits of that activity are. And so, for example, some of them are about a cost play, some of them are about doing a new business, some of them are about growth, and some of them about efficiency. I think the important thing is that the leaders in transformation are building up portfolios of projects that have a bit of all of these in them, in my experience. And, you know, not only are they building up these portfolios with bits of everything in them, they are renewing and scrutinizing that portfolio all the time. And, you know, that's how they're doing it. And, you know, they're learning, they're picking projects where they can learn, and then they're scaling activities. And I hope that this is perhaps something you might be thinking of, and maybe something that is helpful to your company. And, you know, it goes to say that, you know, new technologies are helping them to do that. You know, what's really important, I think, is that if you look at this slide, to be able to get from the left to the right, companies haven't got bottomless pits in terms of having more and more resources they can throw at things. So one of the things that I always advise companies to do is to really look at how you can automate and take work out on the left of this diagram and use those savings to plow into projects that help you to get to the right side. Again, if that's what your industry is doing and that's what your appetite is. Otherwise, if you didn't want to reinvest the resources, you can always give it to the CFO. I'm sure they will be delighted. So I think the fourth thing that I would mention, that as well as the traits we've talked about of these organizations, these are the things that they are really spending time on and running projects in. You know, they're really keen to shatter this mental model of technology and what it can do. And, you know, you only have to think of Tesla for that. You know, electric cars have been around, you know, sort of forever. You know, various companies have been doodling around with them, but it was Elon Musk's vision of what an electric car could be and how trendy it could be and how you would all want one that has potentially shattered the mental model we all had of these funny, stuffy electric cars. The other point I would make is that, as I was just saying before, you know, fit to standard and having this view that some of the things that your company does are commodity and you could do them just the same as anybody else is an important mindset shift to make. Because we're very good, aren't we, in companies, at thinking we're special and we have to have special invoices and special ways of ordering things, you know, when actually it's not where our profits come from and it's not where our innovation is made, and it's okay for us to be just as good as the next company in doing some of these things. And actually, I think when you break through that, it starts to help you to say, actually, it's okay if we use Office 360. It's okay if we just use the same technology, the Salesforce.coms, the SAP.coms, you know, those type of commodity technologies. And in fact, you know, SAP has an ERP, software as a service, that employs fit to standard type of capability. And actually, the types of activities that are non-differentiating, you could argue that technology like that, software as a service, is just the ticket. And I've taken the idea that we were talking about before, about this idea of running operations, differentiating and reimagining, just a stage further. And on the bottom, I've put on this what it means in terms of priorities and what it means in terms of applying the technology and the mindset. So running operations efficiently, what does it mean? And what does it mean in terms of our mindset? It's about commoditizing. Differentiating, what does that mean? It's about building platforms and being able to scale. And reimagining and being disruptive is about experimenting and thinking about multi-year horizons. And like I said before, you know, in the digital world, where everybody sees your company on the web and deals with you electronically, there's an expectation that all companies, big or small, can do all of these things and do them well. Now, I talked a little bit about mode 1 and mode 2 in terms of systems. I mean, this diagram just really reinforces that. And, it just really says, and this is just a slide that was from Gartner, it says about increasing change on the left-hand side and increasing governance at the base level on the right side. And what this is basically saying is, where you are operating innovatively, you want to be able to change your technology the fastest. And you don't want it to hold you back. And, that is really important. And where you have to have your reports right, apply regulations, have technology that is really grounded in mode 1 and is really good at giving you good audit trails, and those things are all automated. And irrespective whether the platforms are the same, it's this mindset around mode 1 and mode 2 technology that the leaders in transformation are really, really good at. I'll just build this up. And again, at SAP, and a lot of other companies have done this, not just our company, but I think it's useful to just see an SAP example, is we have thought about our products and our product set and our platforms, excuse me, and we've started to lay them out in terms of how they help companies to operate in mode 1 level and also to innovate. I think SAP Leonardo and the Internet of Things is really important as being mode 2 type technology that can really help you to link to IoT, to mobile, to do remote control of assets, to be really not just intelligently connected, but also able to forecast and forecast well. As opposed to what we call the digital core, which is mode 1. It's good at all those transactions, good at keeping you compliant, it's really solid, reliable, and resilient. So, I think what I'm saying is that done well transformation does pay off. A lot of companies will vouch for that. And, in terms of IT, for example, it's not about doing piecemeal IT projects. It's about having this portfolio of business change and business innovation that technology is a part of. And hence, starting to think about technology as a strategic partner. And it's also about, persevering. Sometimes you don't always get the breakthrough initially with projects, and it's about persevering. And these are some stats from a study that we did, and 62% of the companies that were the most effective in their industries, 62% of them were running bimodal architecture. And, half of them were really thinking about machine learning and thinking about how they could automate the repetitive tasks to release resources onto the more innovative tasks by using machine learning. And machine learning for things like invoice matching, or for just taking out those repetitive jobs that often you have expensive, clever, smart people doing them, when really we need to be thinking, how do we get to the clever, smart people into the added value tasks? And the same with next generation technology. They're investing in the big data, the analytics, and, trying to get ahead with IoT. Because I just think, and I think we probably, a lot of us on the call think that, that really is going to change the game for many, many, many companies. So one of the things I'd leave you with as I start to just wrap this up is that, there's no point standing on ceremony with some of these transformations that we're talking about. I think it really is about looking at how you can get started and looking at an area in your business that you could get started with, and really using the technology that exists today to do that. Maybe looking at how you can use two-tier architectures, for example, and how you can actually exploit cloud only as a model to really help you to bring innovation and agility to your business. And, partner, design, and again, I think the most important thing is don't just go through this cycle once, go through it many times. And really some closing thoughts from me, really, non-linear growth is really going to differentiate companies. And I do think that the secret to non-linear growth is very much going to be building a talent pipeline for what I had on that graph as the yellow jobs, and you know, the new jobs that actually need humans just as much as AI. It's not one or the other, it's both. I also think that, you know, if I had one piece of advice for CEOs, if you guys were all CEOs on the call, I would say start training people now, and start training people, because the gap is only going to get bigger, and, you know, the more people will realize their value. And I don't know many companies that are going to be able to just do a sea change on their talent. I think the third thing I would say in terms of closing thoughts is accept that data in real time and as it happens is the new standard. And it's like, how can you really get your company operating in real time and standard, and look for some places as to how you can do that. And, you know, think about these latest technologies, you know, think about cloud only, and think about some of these applications like software as a service. They might not be perfect, but are they good enough to get you where you need to go so that your business can focus on innovation and continuous improvement, not just the maintenance. So I've probably talked a lot, perhaps a bit too long, but hey ho. But thank you for listening, and I hope what I had to say was helpful, or at the very least was a starter for some of your projects or some of the thoughts that you can take back to your business.
Thank you, Christine. Really interesting, really thought-provoking. I'm sure the others would agree. So for those of you that are live on the call, as I mentioned at the beginning, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, or a chat room. Many of you have joined these sessions previously, so we can open up for some Q&A. If anyone has any direct questions for Christine, I'm sure she'd be very happy to answer them. So please, if you have any questions, type away, and we can exchange in some dialogue while we have Christine on the call.
I was trying to think, actually, while we're waiting for some questions, that what was the most interesting innovation that some of the companies I've seen have done, actually. We've had some really interesting applications of things like IoT, you know, where people are moving away from maintenance and engineers, and the fridges and the assets and the freezers are all just good enough to order their own maintenance and pay their own bills, which is quite amazing.
Okay, so we have, I'm not sure if you can see that as well, Christine, in the Q&A chat room from Angelo. So Angelo has said, what advice do you have to businesses in terms of engaging staff and breaking down perceptions they may have about what this new technology will mean for them?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question, and you know, unfortunately, you know, machine learning and artificial intelligence has had quite a bit of bad press lately, and I think what we have to do is to help people to understand that cost cutting, and a lot of businesses have been in cost cutting and like a downward spiral, isn't good for everybody. I mean, who wants to work for a company, for example, that is just cutting costs all the time? You know, it's hard work. You know, I think many of us have been there, and it's really hard. And I suppose what we have to help people to understand is actually the more we can start to automate things and have different ways of doing things, then the more we start to put the resources where they're needed. And I think a great example of that is things like the NHS, you know. But everything that gets automated, or some process taken out, or something is made simpler, the more they can afford to reallocate resources and put more resources on the front line. And I kind of think that, you know, a lot of staff will buy into that if they really think that what they're doing is helping other people. I mean, I'd be very interested to know what sort of issues you're thinking about, Angelo. and what sort of challenges you've currently got. If you might like to share a bit more about that. I mean, certainly the thing I would say while you're perhaps thinking about that is, well, I don't think it's so much cost cutting. I think it's about value and about positive cost cutting. Let me say it that way, because I think what people get tired of is cost cutting for cost cutting's sake. And I think what we're saying is actually if you can reorganize your business a different way and think about the resources a bit different way, and only put people on the projects or the activities that create money and create revenue, then actually you're actually making the business better. So for example, you know, if I'm say a civil engineering company and I can really see how much a project is making in terms of its profitability, I can see how much I'm paying for the people I've got on that project. And I think to myself, well, actually, I've got the opportunity to move some of those people from a project where I'm not making a lot of money to a project where I could make a lot more money. Then not only am I creating jobs, but I'm actually creating better jobs, and I'm actually creating more revenue and better revenue. And I think that's probably how we have to start to think about it. You know, it's more about, so this needs to be messaged. Yes, yes, it does. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, yes, absolutely. That's exactly how it has to be messaged. And it has to be messaged in terms of, so for example, I did a project recently with a finance department in a big company, and the CFO was pretty fed up that he felt, and it was a he, was on the back foot. His CEO kept saying to him, well, I want to buy some new businesses, I want to get into some new markets, and you need to help me. The CFO felt he couldn't. He would go to his staff and they said, sorry, we're busy sorting out accounts payable, and we're busy sorting out invoices, and we're busy doing all these sorts of things. And what we helped them to do was to automate a lot of that. It meant that they only needed a couple of people to do the core finances. Let's call it the mode 1 finances. And actually, they were then able to put some of the rest of the team into an area where they could start to think about forecasting business. They could start to do some research. They could look at business forecasting. They could actually look at helping the manufacturing plant to look at stocks better, keep less stock and do more turns. So it became a win-win for everybody, but it is really, you're absolutely right. This is about moving your people, process, resources to value creation. Yeah, it's as simple as that, really. And it's about doing this audit on a lot of the activities we do in business that actually we do out of habit often, or because we've always done them, but actually they're kind of not necessarily value adding. They're necessary, but they're not necessarily value adding or creating. I hope that answers your question a bit. Oh, thank you.